Before introducing the speaker, may I, on behalf of the faculty, express our gratitude to the Mocking You Charitable Foundation for the generous support it has provided in connection with Dame Elish's appointment and this lecture in particular. Elish Angiolini is one of the most distinguished practitioners of Scots law of her generation. Between 1984 and 2006, she rose from being a junior prosecutor in Airdrie Sheriff Court to occupy the position of Lord Advocate, one of the major offices of state in Scotland. In 1997, she was made head of policy in the Crown Office, with responsibility for the development of policy across all functions of that department. This was a time of great political and constitutional change in Scotland. The United Kingdom government, the first Tony Blair government, was committed to enacting legislation to re-establish the Scottish Parliament, to create a devolved Scottish government, and to pass a Human Rights Act to embed in the domestic law of the entire United Kingdom the European Convention on Human Rights. This is the so-called policy of bringing rights home. As head of policy, Elish Angiolini led the Crown Office's preparation for devolution and for the implementation of the Human Rights Act. Since leaving professional practice, Dame Elish has continued to occupy important functions in public life in the United Kingdom. She has been appointed as Principal of St Hugh's College, Oxford, and in 2013 was appointed Chancellor of the University of the West of Scotland. We are privileged to have with us this afternoon a criminal practitioner of great experience, and it is my very great privilege to invite you all now to welcome her and to invite her to deliver her paper.
This evening I'd like to explore the extent to which changes in law, practice and legal training have adequately addressed and challenged our collective understanding of the range of behaviours we encounter in criminal justice systems. The impact that our traditional assumptions about such behaviours may have on the assessment of credibility and reliability of witness testimony will also be looked at. I ask, are systems of justice sufficiently nimble and responsive to growing knowledge about the human condition? Or is there a need to resist the psychological theories hovering around the system, lest the assessment of evidence become hopelessly complex and the sentencing process totally immersed in the possibly dystopian concept of therapeutic justice, a notion the emergence of which many consider comes at the expense of the erosion of fundamental principles of personal responsibility and punishment. Are we lawyers truly equipped to deal with these rapidly increasing challenges to the foundations of so many of our long-standing doctrines in the 21st century? In short, do we lawyers all need to see a psychiatrist? The establishment of judicial training institutes, colleges of policing, prosecution colleges, and the development of a wide range of excellent specialist CPD training by the Bar, that's continuing professional development by the Bar and law societies across the world, has now provided a platform within the practising profession to address the deficit in our understanding of many of the complex behavioural issues inherent in a wide range of cases. But some important aspects of this knowledge remain in the minds of specialists and in those practitioners who deal with these matters almost exclusively, and particularly in the minds of expert witnesses. But it's still out with the understanding of the range of what is perceived as normal human behaviour by many in our communities, and in that context I include those who are potential jurors. Nonetheless, the caution with which developing social and medical science is treated by many practitioners in the system has meant that much of the analysis and debate is still largely confined to academia and to pressure groups. As the late Professor Hart observed in his seminal work on punishment, that caution is derived largely by the fear of being hoodwinked. As he suggested, any increase in the number of conditions required to establish criminal liability increases the opportunity for deceiving courts or juries by the pretence that some condition is not satisfied. Autism spectrum condition is a term used to describe all people who have difficulties with social communication, social interaction, and social imagination. They may find it hard to make eye contact or to do so in an odd or unusual way, which makes them look weird. It makes people think this is someone weird, when in fact, making eye contact can be painful with someone who's suffering from this. And yet, when giving evidence, if someone does not make eye contact with the judge or with whoever's questioning, it can be construed as an indicator, perhaps, that they're not telling the truth. And traditionally has been looked on, if you don't look someone in the eye, particularly if it's one of my sons when I'm accusing them of something, or they're accusing me of having taken a biscuit or half a biscuit, as I want to do from the biscuit tin, avoiding eye contact can be construed as a lack of credibility in your explanation. As a prosecutor and as a law officer over 30 years, my only source of knowledge I mentioned of autism came from the film Rain Man. But the extent to which behaviour by those with Asperger's has been understood and their needs dealt with, I think, is still something where we are very, very significantly challenged in the justice system across the world. The expectation of a strong manifestation of distress following rape clearly has a substantial history across Europe. While the doctrine of distress has been of immense assistance in the Scottish context for overcoming the strict purist notion of corroboration from two independent sources and also supporting the credibility of the complainant, it has created an inevitable inference, supported in Roman law and medieval law, that the absence of a display of distress suggests the complainer's evidence may not be reliable or credible. There can be little doubt that the lack of manifest distress at or shortly after a rape continues to be seen as substantially weakening the case. It is a feature upon which the complainant will normally be subject to cross-examination and may be a factor that troubles a jury, members of which have the same ingrained expectation of a display of distress. Yet, as a forensic physician can explain, the notion that only a florid display of distress is evidence of distress is quite simply wrong. An understanding of the neurobiology of trauma and the immediate and ongoing symptoms victims experience could assist the jury to understand how victims experience sexual assault and other assaults and how the trauma impacts on them. During any major attack or trauma, the chemical reactions to a traumatic event are engaged. The stress response is a natural defence mechanism in response to danger in the human condition. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, the behaviour and responses of those who have been subjected to rape are subject to stereotypes and myths which are now incorporated with the best of intention in our law of evidence. If there's to be a better prospect of securing justice for those complainants whose responses and behaviours do not comply with these myths and stereotypes, we need to educate ourselves better and ensure that those members of the public who will serve as jurors have the opportunity to be equally well educated on these complex and delicate issues of human behaviour. Our law also needs to develop in a more nuanced fashion to reflect the greater sophistry of our developing knowledge and greater understanding of human behaviour than was available to Ulpian and his peers. The simplistic view overlooks the self-blaming, incredulity and efforts to suppress distress and normalise the situation by carrying on as usual that sometimes accompanies a traumatic event. We now know of a great range of complex issues that challenge the capacity of the conventional justice system to recognise and respond to the individual needs of those who participate. Participants in the justice system with, for example, mental health issues, learning difficulties, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dysgraphia, epilepsy are commonplace. They may appear as accused, witnesses, jurors, lawyers, judges and victims. As the work of the Commission on Women Offenders that I chaired in 2011 disclosed, so many of those incarcerated in prison have been the victims of violent and sexual assault and whose self-medication with drugs and alcohol lead them into acquisitive crime and or mental illness. The efficacy of the sentencing process is also just as reliant on developing understanding of the human condition and what sentences are likely to deter and reduce recidivism. In the United Kingdom, our toolkit of sentencing responses remains remarkably crude, given what we now understand about those that we incarcerate. However, I'm optimistic that diversionary programmes and a problem-solving approach to a wide range of criminal behaviour will prove to be much more effective and much cheaper than the incarceration of so many. Recognition of and improved responses to the complexity of the human condition and to the individual needs of so many participants in our courts is a significant challenge for all of us in the justice systems across the world. We lawyers need to continue to up our game. Thank you very much indeed.
Really appreciate your sharing, especially in giving us a good lecture on forensic psychology. And you also mentioned about use of expert witness, which could also backfire as being seen as the hired guns. So should we start with legal education in the universities, and how do we enhance the understanding within the legal profession after they leave the university, and how do we permeate that in the wider society so that the jury become more understanding?
Thank you very much for that question, and I think it's absolutely relevant. It's what I was saying is I think that it does need to form part of our core education as lawyers. The ability to communicate is critical for lawyers, no matter what the nature of your practice, be it criminal, commercial, or whatever area, that communication and understanding how other people are understanding you, and likewise, and how they're able to participate in any part of the legal system is critical. But I do think it's about the community as a whole, understanding everyone in the community better. Mental ill health is very misunderstood. And we must know more about it because there's so many people suffering from mental ill health in the community. It's not something strange and dislocated. It's very commonplace. So I think it actually goes back to school. It's not just university. I think we should understand about these conditions, and I think the schools are doing a good job at making sure that they're much more aware of diversity for religions, for other aspects of nationality. But I also think we need to go further and people understand these conditions so that they can see the challenges that people have when they come into the system and understand it better. So it's not just compartmentalised for us. I think we need to do it, but if we understand it and the jurors don't understand it and they have these prejudices still, then we're still going to have a very, very long tail before there's any significant change in how we deal with these particular problems.